Hey, welcome to a new episode of Princella's Real World. I'm your girl, Princella. If this is your first time and you like real world, real news, and real views, make sure you click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that way you don't miss out on any content you want to get updated. Okay, today we're recording episode 3 in the abortion series. If you haven't seen episode 1 or 2, you may want to watch those so you can kind of get an overview, because this is going to be an 8-part series about abortion. Okay, and so there has to be sections of this commentary because it's a big thing. It's a deep topic. All right, so with that being said, today we're going to be talking about human behavioral patterns. Human behavioral patterns. I'm a firm believer that understanding is the key to everything. You know, you hear a lot of people talk about knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. You got to have knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. But do they really understand, or do they really know what that means? Because I am under the impression that many do not know what that means. Like, that knowledge, wisdom, and understanding thing has been branded. It's branded for certain think groups or groupthink, such as, you know, the 5%ers or even the Nation of Islam. The knowledge, wisdom, and understanding has been branded. And I don't think that people understand or comprehend that knowledge, wisdom, and understanding is not an esoteric thing. It doesn't mean knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of the book that you're reading, like the Quran, or the esoteric information that you're immersed in. That is not specific to that. Knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of all things that are around you. And one of the things that the Bible says is that my people suffer for the lack of knowledge. Well, people in the Christian faith and those who are part of the Hebrew Israelites, they believe that statement is specific to just what they're studying as far as religion is concerned. But my people suffer from the lack of knowledge means of everything. It's not branded to one specific thing. And so one of the things that people lack knowledge and understanding of is human nature. Behavior, human behavior. They are unaware of it. So when they create their ideals of how they think people should operate or how society should be, they create these ideals so far away from reality that it begins to just sound ridiculous. So what we're going to do is we're going to be jumping into John Calhoun's rat utopia experiment. This particular experiment was done by a behavioral scientist who adored rats. And he used rats in this experiment to create some results to see what would happen if you provided the rats everything that they needed, from food, housing, living quarters, all of these things. And so he started off with 4 rats. He started off with 4 rats, and they had everything they needed. The only thing that they didn't have was space. Now you're going to say, well, Princella, how does this tie into abortion? Well, this is going to tie in because I'm going to show you what occurs as a result of people being compacted into small or overpopulated environments. Okay, because I'm going to show you how the statistics that we talked about on episode 2 make sense if you understand human behavioral patterns. So a coulda, shoulda, woulda is irrelevant, because if it coulda, shoulda, woulda been that way, it would be that way. Okay, so we gotta stay into the real world. Anyway, here we go. I'm going to read this to you. It's just best that if I just read it to you so that it comes from somebody other than myself. Anyway, what does utopia look like for mice? And utopia is something people think of all the time when they think about human nature. They create these utopian ideals in their mind. So this particular one is entitled Always in Search of a Perfect World. I have come to the conclusion that humans do not like being human, because they've been under the illusion or under the guise that humans were once created perfect and so far away from animals, and they fell from glory, and now everything that they're doing is sin. Every animal characteristic that they have is because they're in sin. So they're trying so hard to eradicate the very base animal nature that makes them human. And so they create these ideals of a perfect world, not understanding that there is no such thing as perfection. There is no such thing as all good feelings, because you're basing this perfection off of your emotions. Okay, so every time you create or fix one thing, you mess up something else, because that's how this reality is. Okay, anyway, on July 9th, 1968, eight white mice were placed into a strange box at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Maybe box isn't the right word for it. The space was more like a room known as Universe 25, about the size of a small storage unit. The mice themselves were bright and healthy, hand-picked from the Institute's breeding stock. They were given the run of the place, which had everything that mice need: food, water, climate control, hundreds of nesting boxes to choose from, and a lush floor of shredded paper and ground corn cob. This is a far cry from a wild mouse's life. No cats, no traps, no long winters. It's even better than your average lab mouse's, which is constantly interrupted by white-coated humans with scalpels or syringes. The residents of Universe 25 were mostly left alone, save for one man who would peer at them from above, and his team of similarly interested assistants. They must have thought they were the luckiest mice in the world. They couldn't have known the truth, that within a few years, they and their descendants would all be dead. The man who played Mouse God and came up with this doomed universe was named John Bumpus Calhoun. As Edmund Ramsden and John Adams detail in a paper, Escaping the Laboratory, the rodent experiments of John B. Calhoun and their cultural influence. Calhoun spent his childhood traipsing and around Tennessee, chasing toads, collecting turtles, and banding birds. These adventures eventually led him to a doctorate in biology and then a job in Baltimore, where he was tasked with studying the habits of Norway rats, one of the city's chief pets. In 1947, to keep a close eye on his charges, Calhoun constructed a quarter-acre rat city behind his house and filled it with breeding pairs. He expected to be able to house 5,000 rats there, but over the 2 years he observed the population never exceeded 150. At that point, the rats became too stressed to reproduce. They started acting weirdly, rolling dirt into balls rather than digging normal tunnels. They hissed and fought. This fascinated Calhoun. If the rats had everything they needed, what was keeping them from overrunning this city or this little city just as they had all of Baltimore? Intrigued, Calhoun built another, slightly bigger metropolis, this time in a barn with ramps connecting several different rooms. Then he built another and another, hopping between patrons that supported his research and framing his work in terms of population. How many individuals could a rodent city hold without losing its collective mind? By 1954, he was working under the auspices of the National Institute of Mental Health, which gave him whole rooms to build his rodent-topias. Some of these featured rats, while others focused on mice instead. Like a rodent real estate developer, he incorporated ever better amenities, climbable walls, food hoppers that could serve 24 customers at once, lodging he described as walk-up room apartments. Video records of his experiments show Calhoun with a pleased smile and a pipe in his mouth, color-coded mice scurrying over his boots. Still, at a certain point, each of these rodent paradises collapsed. There could be no escape from the behavioral consequences of rising population density. Calhoun wrote in earlier papers, even Universe 25, the biggest, best mouse utopia of all, built after a quarter century of research, failed to break this pattern. In late October, the first litter of mouse pups was born. After that, the population doubled every 2 months. 20 mice, then 40, then 80. The babies grew up and had babies of their own. Families became dynasties, carving out, holding down the best in cage real estate. By August 1969, the population numbered 620. Then, as always, things took a turn. Such rapid growth put too much pressure on the mouse way of life. As new generations reached adulthood, many couldn't find mates or places in the social order. The mouse equivalent of a spouse and a job. Spinster females retreated to high-up nesting boxes where they lived alone, far from the family neighborhoods. Washed-up males gathered in the center of the universe, near the food, where they fretted, languished, and attacked each other. Meanwhile, overextended mouse moms and dads began moving nests constantly to avoid their unsavory neighbors. They also took their stress out on their babies, kicking them out of the nest too early or even losing them during moves. Population growth slowed way down again. Most of the adolescent mice retreated even further from societal expectations, spending all of their time eating, drinking, sleeping, and grooming, and refusing to fight or to even attempt to mate. These individuals were forever changed. When Calhoun's colleague attempted to transplant some of them to a more normal situations, they didn't remember how to do anything. In May of 1970, just under 2 years into the study, the last baby was born, and the population entered a swan dive of perpetual senescence. It's unclear exactly what the last resident of Universe 25 perished, but it was probably sometime in 1973. Paradise couldn't even last a half a decade. In 1973, Calhoun published the Universe 25 research as Death Squared, the explosive growth and demise of a rat population, or a mouse population. It is, to put it lightly, an intense academic reading experience. He quotes liberally from the Book of Revelation, italicized certain words for emphasis: to kill with the sword, and with famine and the pestilence, and by wild beasts. He gave his exclaimed discoveries catchy names. The mice who forgot how to mate were the beautiful ones. Rats who crowded around bottles, water bottles, were social drinkers. The overall societal breakdown was the behavioral sink. In other words, it was exactly the kind of diction you'd expect from someone who spent his entire life perfecting the art of a mouse dystopia. Most frightening are the parallels he draws between rodent and human society. I shall largely speak of mice, he begins, but my thoughts are on man. Both species, he explains, are vulnerable to two types of death, that of the spirit and that of the body. Even though he had removed physical threats, doing so had forced the rodents of Universe 25 into a spiritually unhealthy situation, full of crowding, overstimulation, and contact with various mouse strangers. To a society experiencing the rapid growth of cities and reacting in various ways quite poorly, this story seemed familiar. Senators brought it up in meetings. It showed in a science fiction and comic books. Even Tom Wolfe, never lost for description, used Calhounian terms to describe New York City, calling all of Gotham a behavioral sink. This is very, very, very important to understand, because if you create a utopian ideal in your mind that does not factor in human behavioral patterns, then you're living in a fairy tale world. If you go back to the beginning where I began to speak about the mouse's behaviors after being crowded, you understand how abortions even take place. Because you're not going to tell people who are closely connected or closely related to someone in the same vicinity to not have sex. Because when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, which we will look up there, food, water, sex, security are all the base nature of any human and any animal. Before you reach self-actualization, all of those things have to be met. So what you're asking people to do, you're asking people who have their behavioral patterns impacted by their environment to psychologically rise above that and get into a self-actualization thought of mind and live out some fantasy or ideal that you think is logical without taking into account all of these things. Because if you look on the screen right now, I have posted from yesterday's or from episode 2's statistics that the majority of abortions, one, happen in metropolitan areas such as a New York, such as a Baltimore, okay? And the least amount of abortions take place in sparse areas such as the suburbs, where there's not a lot of population density, okay? So these people are secluded or segregated from the metropolitan areas, which has a dense population. But not only that, the majority of abortions that take place are amongst poor and low income people who are trapped in their lower nature. They're trapped at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. And so what did he do? What did John Calhoun do? He gave the rats everything they needed. This is why democratic policies are actually bad for minorities overall, because they mimic the John Calhoun experiment of giving them everything they need, which keeps them down. It keeps them down. And it keeps them down because they're also in these metropolitan areas being given everything. So you're not taking these things into account, which you should. White people are not subjected to the same environments as black people are. So when you look at data, you have to look at it in context. So now what is going to happen is we're going to talk about the cause and effect of the ideals that you have based on what we've seen thus far. Okay, so if you want to know more about John Calhoun's rat utopia experiment, the links are posted below. There are links to the first 2 episodes of the abortion series. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section because I really, really want to know your thoughts. I really want to know how you think. Also, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so that way you're notified every time I upload. I thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you on the next episode.